Now, I've been coaching Overwatch for a very long time. In fact, it's been 7 years at this point since I started coaching Overwatch. Now, in the hundreds or thousands of coaching sessions I've done, these are the 5 biggest mistakes that I have seen as an Overwatch coach. So if you've been struggling, want to improve your skills and climb, this is the perfect video for you. But special thanks to the sponsor of this video, PolyAI. PolyAI allows you to create a unique character chatbot by yourself and talk with others. PolyAI has over 10 million downloads worldwide and is available on both Android and iOS, and we have a unique promo code that allows you to get premium features specifically on this channel. Now, I've been grinding some Overwatch and struggling quite a bit, so now that we're here, let's ask some Overwatch characters exactly what we can do to start winning some games. That depends on the characters you play and what you do with them. Do you focus on the offensive players, defensive players? Genji, I would recommend playing the mid-range and focus on being aggressive, as Genji is very deadly in close range. Roadhog, Junkrat's best friend, crush the enemy in Roadhog style. I don't know how to explain it, but my strategy for any game is simple. Don't get hit. You can't win the game if you die. PolyAI allows you to create characters as well. If you want to generate image, you can do that by inputting one and adding a prompt, or you can actually create a brand new character always from scratch by adding in an intro, greeting, and information about the character. So I definitely suggest checking out PolyAI yourself. It's also available on Chrome, so you can share it with any friend, and of course on Android and iOS. Use our code in the description down below so that you can get extra premium items. And once again, special thanks to the sponsor of this video, PolyAI. But the first big mistake we got to talk about is not matching the pace or tempo of a fight. In any Overwatch engagement between you and the enemy, there are certain stages that happen. And the first stage often is a gather of information, a fight for position, and a trading of resources. So you're poking in the neutral, you're trading a lot of damage and cooldowns, and you're healing your team. There's a lot of things that are happening in this stage of the game. But oftentimes, there'll be some sort of catalyst that will change the tempo of a fight. So while this would be a slow or neutral tempo, a fast tempo would be going and speeding in at the enemy. A fast tempo would be going in and pushing the enemy aggressively and taking the fight to them. A fast tempo would be actively using cooldowns and ultimates. Even if you're a long-range poke comp, actively using a lot of cooldowns and using them really rapidly would be speeding up that tempo. And the reason that I need to explain all of this is because oftentimes players have missed tempo with their team and possible playmaking opportunities. Now, the simplest thing that you'll see is a tank walking in and applying pressure, and then players not walking in with their tank, right? The tank is creating positive tempo, and players are sitting there not responding to that tempo with more tempo. Because being on the same page is incredibly important when we talk about pace or tempo, because you got to think of it like a dam that is holding back water, and a little bit of water that is hitting the dam will not break. But the more water you can press on the dam all at once, the dam is likely to break. And the analogy here is that the breaking dam is players dying on the enemy team and your team winning the team fight. So you want to compound this. So if your tank walks in, you want to match that aggression, but that's not the only thing that can create tempo. There's a lot of things that create tempo. Someone could get really, really injured and they're 1 HP and they can't actually peek or be in that team fight. Someone could get picked off. That's a huge way to swing tempo. Someone could get anti-nated, or multiple people. This is a great way to swing tempo. The idea here is that the more things that happen that advantages your team, the more aggressive you should respond to that with adding to the tempo compounding on the enemy team. So like an example where I see this going extremely wrong is I oftentimes will coach or VOD review Genji players, and then they'll just randomly try to blade in the neutral. They'll dash up, they'll pop that blade, and they'll go in, right? And what's going to happen if you just randomly blade? Well, guess what? The Ana's going to sleep you, and your dashes are going to get Suzu'd, and you're going to get hooked, and you're going to freaking cry, and then go to Reddit and be like, buff Genji, right? But really, in order for a blade to be successful, the more tempo your team inflicts on the enemy, the more successful the blade is likely to be. So let's say, for one, your tank is walking in. That's someone that is taking aggression and is also aiding the aggression of your blade. But let's say your Ana hits a big nade, like we talked about before. That could bait out Suzu, make players play more passively, or have support's attention fixed on someone they're going to heal right when the anti-nade wears off. So if you want to succeed as pretty much any character, whether it's a support, a DPS, or a tank, you need to recognize what your teammates are doing to the enemy and how fast or aggressive are they playing, and match your plays and your aggression to that aggression. Now, on the other side of things, if your team is actively dying, hurt, weak, low cooldown, or being pressed by the enemy, this is not the time for you to go crazy and make a really aggressive play, especially if you have the ability to actually keep that aggressivity from the enemy in check. Because the second your team gets naded, the second one of your teammates die, the second your tank gets hurt and he has to back up, those are the points where the enemy is actively looking to be aggressive, looking to take that tempo and create a team fight win. And that's when you need to be ready to deny those things. So learning this concept is one of the most important things that you could possibly have in Overwatch, but it's the thing that so many players miss, and I think it's also something that will prevent you from climbing to the higher ranks of play ever if you don't learn it. Now, before we move on, if there's a guide you want to see, press that subscribe and let me know down below, and I'll get on it right away. But let's get back to the video. Now, number 2 is not contesting enemies or enemy positions. It's so common that there will be a problem or a person in a powerful position that you do not flush out, and it will come back and lose you a team fight. Here's a perfect example. Let's say that there's a tracer trying to constantly get into your backline. Now, you might say, hey, chasing her down is pointless. She's going to blink away. She might recall. But you got to understand that it's valuable to force a tracer out of your backline. That's the position that she wants to have, so you don't want her to have that position. There's a reason that she wants it, because she can come at your supports from behind and not use any cooldowns to get there, and that allows her to duel and then recall and still be in your backline. Now, of course, not every character is going to be able to contest a tracer, and it's also equally as pointless for you to run around the map chasing her down and never catching her. But don't let a tracer get it for free. And if you have the means to, some characters can actually force a tracer back in her backline and back out of your backline and in the good position that she wants to be in. As a great example, on Genji, when a tracer tries to double blink into my backline, I dash her, threaten lethal, force her to recall. I always want her out of my backline. Get out of my backline. Don't allow that tracer to go and assassinate my Ana, assassinate my Zen. I'm forcing that tracer off. Now, there's other positions that are equally as important to challenge, even if they're difficult to do so. A Hanzo on the high ground, or a Widow on an off angle. Pressure needs to be applied to these characters constantly so that they cannot keep these angles. And you might be like, hey, what am I supposed to do against a Widow that's taking a far off angle? If you're not able to get out of our line of sight, you need to threaten that angle with damage, pressure, or something that will disincentivize the Widow from challenging that angle. Because you got to understand that these positions that the enemies are taking, if left unchecked, they will kill your entire team. Like a fantastic Widow will peek an angle once and get a kill, right? But a bad Widow will take 3, 4, 5 shots to get a kill, but you can't give them 3, 4, 5 shots. And that good Widow, you especially cannot give 3, 4, 5 shots. Every time there's an angle that you are scared of, wary of, you need to be extra ready for an enemy to take that angle and challenge you from that angle. Now, also, as a tank player, it's your job to make sure that you're constantly addressing high ground position. If there's an enemy team set up, and especially an enemy tank set up, that is on the high ground, able to look down on you, you're way more susceptible to a lot of cooldowns. Like, think about how easy it is for you to get a 3-person nade if you're standing above the enemy team. It's like super easy, and it's important that that is not allowed. So if there's a way for you to route around the map to take that high ground, it's really important. But you might be wondering, how do you contest positions if you don't have the means to as a character? So let's say you're a support and your tank's not taking the high ground. How do you take that high ground? How do you contest that high ground? Or maybe you're a tank and there's an off-angling DPS that you can't do anything about. How do you interact with that? I think it comes down to a couple of things. You can communicate, you can ping, or you can route in a different way. So communication and ping are kind of two sides of the same coin, just talking, calming, or pinging, allowing your teammates to know where someone is. In fact, I think pinging is one of the most effective ways to tell someone, hey, there's something that needs to be targeted here. There's some important piece of information everyone should know about right here. That's really important. And then, of course, when we talk about routing, we talk about making it so that you are less susceptible to some of these really powerful angles and areas on the map. Maybe the enemy has a really strong high ground perch where they can look right down on you. If you can route in a different way that doesn't put you directly underneath them or make it so that it's super easy for them to use their abilities on you, then that's better, right? Especially if you don't have the means or you don't have a tank that is willing to deal with them directly. Basically, the point I'm making here is that positions aren't good and bad in a vacuum, right? A position needs to accomplish something. If a DPS is trying to deal damage from cover, then they need to be able to see you. They need to be able to interact with you. It doesn't matter if it's like the perfect high ground position with a piece of cover they can wiggle behind if there's no one there for them to directly interact with. So knowing where these strong, frustrating positions are can help you navigate to places that you can set the terms of your fight and your engagement a bit more favorably than otherwise playing into their strength. And number 3, and this one is simple, but also very important, and it's autopiloting your playstyle. So many players will play one character and they'll do the same thing every single time, no matter what their team is doing, no matter what the enemy is doing. And the reason that this is so bad is that you're putting yourself in an unfair situation over and over again. So one of the things that you see a lot is like the Tracer off, right? The Tracer 1v1. Who's the better Tracer? But not always is the Tracer matchup fair. So a perfect example of this is, let's say the enemy team has like a Winston, a Genji, a Tracer, a Kiriko, and a Lucio, right? The perfect dive comp. They are running in and they're going to try to jump your Ana over and over and over again. Now, let's say you're playing like an Ana cast Tracer with a Rein, right? You are Tracer and they are Tracer, but what your team comp is trying to accomplish is fundamentally different. What's going to happen if you try to jump their backline and try to assassinate a character? Well, one, they all have mobility, so they can get away from that. Number 2, there's mobile characters that are going to be hard for you to interact with. And number 3, no one on your team is coming with you to dive with you. So yeah, you could maybe bait out like a Boop, an Ampeel, a Suzu, but killing someone gonna be really, really hard to do. So one Tracer is playing a really dive-heavy playstyle that is targeting that Ana and trying to overload her utility, while the other Tracer should be playing a really different playstyle. But what is it? If you don't know that you can play something besides dive, then you are basically stuck. You're autopiloting the same playstyle over and over again. Now, here's what you could do instead that I think gets you a lot more value. You could mark the Tracer, or maybe even mark the Genji. Now, you might be wondering why you would do this. Why would you mark a character? And to mark is to follow them around and force them out of your backline, force them to recall, force them to dash away. Basically, you see no one but them, and you are hunting them down no matter what they're doing. And why would you do this? Well, you're not going to be able to create a pick opportunity that easily just by going in over and over again. In fact, you're going to recall a lot and not get anything done. But by stopping the enemy team, by making it so that that Tracer is recalling and not going in with the Genji and with the Winston, now your Ana and Cass have a much better chance of fighting off 2 people instead of 3. Because of the compound thing we talked about before, the breaking of the dam, you are basically holding back some of the water so that only a little bit of water comes through the dam, and maybe enough for your team to hold on so that when you let go of that water, it's coming at a different time. And now the water has subsided. Your teammates have got their cooldown back. Your teammates have forced away the Winston and the Genji. And now your team is going to win because the enemy team had a plan, couldn't do that plan, couldn't do enough to break through all the cooldowns, to get all the picks, and now you won. So you got to understand that these are 2 completely different styles of Tracer, not even remotely close to the same. And I'm going to tell you that every single character has completely different playstyles that they will play, depending on their team comp, depending on the enemy team comp. And it's a lot to go over, but what I'm going to try to do is, if you ask me in the comments what you should do or how your playstyle should change over any character, I'm going to try to give you the best response I can, and then I'll make a follow-up video in the future talking about how you should change your playstyles across different characters, depending on what you have, what your opponents have, and things like that. But this is a tip that I need you to start thinking about a lot more, because if you don't think about this, you're going to set yourself up for failure, really. Now, number 4 is knowing the counter, but not understanding the counter. And a lot of players know what they shouldn't play into what. Swap off a Pharah into a Cassidy. Swap off a Genji into a Winston. Swap off a Winston into a Reaper. People generally know what these counters are, but that's about it. Not understanding why the counter exists or what that even means, but more about what you should not play against certain characters. And this breeds a lot of toxicity. I'm sure no matter what you played, you've had a teammate yell at you like, why are you playing this into that, right? You see that all the time. And even you yourself, you have some preconceived notions about what you should play and not play against certain characters. But if that's as deep as your understanding goes, then it's really not going to be applicable knowledge. Because I'm going to tell you that there's so many different ways to still get value into things that might be counters. And the idea of countering characters is also more of a spectrum than a hard or soft rule. It's not like one character is just rock and another character is just scissors. That's not really how Overwatch works, because there's players that can play a character wrong, and if you don't play a character correctly or well, you're not even playing what that character is good at or doing what that character is good at, so you're not countering anything. It doesn't really matter if a Sombra counters Zen, right? If the Sombra constantly goes on that Zen and that Zen is next to their team, they're playing in their teammates' line of sight, they are kicking the Sombra away, and they're getting healed from their team. Like, there's a lot of situations and factors here that it could be very possible that a Sombra tries to farm a Zen like multiple lives and dies every time without getting any value. And I know that this has happened to you and against you a lot, where someone's like, hey, I'm just gonna counter you, and they don't actually counter you. And I've made 2 counter guide videos, one to counter tanks and one just to counter every character in the game that you can go watch. And in those videos, I don't say pick this character to counter this character. You have to understand the strengths and weaknesses of a character to know how you can get value, even if a character might have a slight favorable matchup against you. And it's also important that just because a character can shut you down does not mean that you have to allow that to happen over and over again. It's not a 1v1. Overwatch is not a 1v1 game. You're not in a vacuum. Like, if I'm playing Genji, I can't really interact with the Pharah that much at all, especially if she's being pocketed by Mercy, right? I can't do anything. But I might either wait for her to get attacked by my teammate, fall down, be vulnerable. I might look to counter her ultimate in a key moment. I might just try to stay alive and avoid her pressure so that she can't go in aggressively. Or I might go and harass the other support or make a play on the other DPS. I've been in way too many coaching calls with way too many players that they will either always play the counter swapping game or they'll start flaming their teammates because they're not swapping against a soft counter. Just the character existing is enough for them to try to leverage that into getting people to swap or getting mad or anything like that. But when you start the climb to GM and top 500 and you realize that there are these Junkrat one tricks that are consistently in top 500 that won't swap even if there's a goddamn Pharah Mercy in every game, and they'll still find ways to win. I'm not saying that counters don't exist and matchups don't exist. I'm saying that getting out of this mentality is super important for your development as a player and your overall understanding of Overwatch. Now, the 5th and perhaps most important mistake that I see in this video is not actively trying to develop your mechanical skill. And I know Overwatch is a complex game and there's a lot of things to learn. There's a lot of ways that you're challenged in Overwatch, but mechanical skill is incredibly important no matter who you're playing. I don't care if you're playing characters that don't require aim skill, you should still learn every single movement, tech, advanced thing that you can on that character mechanically. And if you're brand new, I don't expect you to have great gun skill or great mechanical skill at all. But if you've been playing this game for years and your aim and your mechanics are still subpar, you haven't been focusing enough on your mechanical skill. And the reason that mechanical skill is so important is, let's say that you are gonna go take a fight. You're pushing an opponent that is weak, no cooldown, 1 HP. A fight that on paper you should win like 95% of the time. If you ever lose those, which you will start to lose those more and more up against players that have good mechanics and you have bad mechanics. Because mechanics is like a failure rate, right? If your mechanics are high, you have a less failure rate at performing a certain mechanical task. Hitting a body shot or confirming a kill or hitting a blink melee. These are all things that if your mechanical skill is high enough, you will not fail these simple things. But if your mechanical skill is too low, you might be able to win if you could accomplish a simple mechanical performance or simple mechanical skill. But if you mess that up because your mechanics are bad, you're losing when on paper you should be winning. And I can't express it enough how important mechanics were in my development as a player, because I neglected those the most for the longest time. And even though I learned a lot, studied a lot, watched a lot of content, really became a student of the game, it didn't matter ultimately at pushing me over the edge to become a Grandmaster top 500 level player. My mechanics were the missing piece. And I do not want each and every one of y'all to be neglecting those. Let me know what big mistake you see in your games down below. Press that subscribe and let me know what video you want to see. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.